I, David Souter, do solemnly swear.
David who? That was the initial reaction from Americans to a little-known judge from New Hampshire named in 1990 to the nation's highest court. Even the nominee didn't know what to think when President Bush called him with the news.
I was in a state of virtual shock.
The New England native had been a federal judge for only a few months when he was tapped to replace liberal lion William Brennan, a chance many Republicans hoped to move the high court to the right.
He'll be a superb justice for the Supreme Court.
In reality, Souter was a typical old-fashioned Yankee Republican, a moderate with an independent, even quirky streak. He had a long career in public service, New Hampshire's Attorney General and a trial judge who later sat on the state Supreme Court. Confirmation hearings were a breeze, since his federal experience was brief and his public stance on hot-button issues like abortion fuzzy.
I have not got any agenda on what should be done with Roe v. Wade if that case were brought before me.
This is nobody's body but mine.
That did not stop women's rights groups from sounding the alarm. Douglas Kamek worked the Souter nomination as a White House lawyer.
At the time, David Souter was called the stealth candidate, and so tabula rasa, he showed up at the bench, and it was a surprise thereafter.
One of the first surprises came in 1992 when the High Court reaffirmed the fundamental right to abortion in the so-called Casey appeal. Souter was part of a three-justice coalition that ultimately decided the case. Peter Rubin was his law clerk at the time.
The law for him, unlike for many of his conservative colleagues, was not an abstract set of rules totally divorced from its effect in the real world.
What did puzzle him was technology. He famously told Congress he would allow cameras in his courtroom only over my dead body. He shunned cell phones, pagers, and wrote drafts of his opinions in longhand as a court-issued computer gathered dust in his chambers. Souter's lifestyle made him stand out on the Supreme Court despite all efforts to avoid the spotlight. A lifelong bachelor, he lived in a tiny Washington apartment, escaping often to his ancestral farm in rural New Hampshire. He kept comfortably to routine, bringing a daily lunch of an apple and yogurt in a plastic grocery bag, eating alone in his chambers.
People don't know him. He doesn't go to parties. He doesn't do speaking events. David Souter is really an isolated individual, very much by choice.
Colleagues dismissed reports Souter was ready to quit after the 2000 Florida ballot disputes handed the presidency to George W. Bush, but they privately confirm he considered it a personal blow to the integrity of the court he loved.
He believed it was the ultimate politicization of the Supreme Court.
To critics, Souter, siding with the liberal bloc, only reaffirmed their view of him as a disappointment.
He's been a kind of go-along guy in the context of being on the liberal or progressive side of the court. I have to think George H.W. Bush wanted more out of his judicial nominee than that, but that's what he got.
But others think history will judge David Souter, who retired from the Supreme Court in 2009, in kinder terms.
A judge's judge, someone with deep respect for the role and the institution, and deep faith, actually, in the ability of Americans in all the branches to work things out.
That kind of sense of responsibility, that kind of care in the deciding of each individual's case.
What we can do, and what we try to do instead, is to pass it on, and to make the gifts and kindnesses that come to us a kind of human currency that goes on traveling. I will try to preserve it. I will try to transmit it, I hope refreshed, to another generation of the American Republic, which is the inheritance of us all.
Breaking news, we just learned that retired Supreme Court Justice David Souter has passed away at the age of 85. Let's get right to CNN Chief Supreme Court analyst Joan Piskupic. Stepped down from the court in 2009 after 19 years, but I think held a significant role in the history toward the end of the century.
Oh, absolutely, John. I think it's a very sad day in the court world. The Supreme Court is a tight family in many ways. You know, they're all appointed for life, and David Souter remained close to many of his former colleagues. He was a gem of an individual, a real Yankee from New Hampshire, a very reserved style that just warmed the hearts of his colleagues. But let me tell you what was important about him to the country. George H.W. Bush appointed him in 1990 to replace liberal icon William Brennan. And here was this conservative, or at least this reputed conservative, coming onto the court. And George H.W. Bush's chief of staff at the time said, oh, he'll be a home run for conservatives. Turned out that he was everything but that. He ended up quickly moving over to the liberal camp, voting to uphold abortion rights, voting to uphold affirmative action, being a real voice of due process and individual rights on the court. And so much so, John, that he inspired a mantra among conservative firebrands, which was no more suitors. And they started being much more attentive to screening candidates for the right wing. But he was, as I said, he was very beloved among his colleagues. He was known as someone who would be just as happy eating a little bit of yogurt and apple in his office than sometimes joining them at their group dinners. And the minute the court was out for the summer, he would get in his little, I think it was a VW Rabbit, and speed away for his home in New Hampshire. And let me just tell you what Chief Justice John Roberts said as he revealed his death yesterday at his home in New Hampshire. He said, Justice David Souter served our court with great distinction for nearly 20 years. He brought uncommon wisdom and kindness to a lifetime of public service. After retiring to his beloved New Hampshire, it certainly was, in 2009, he continued to render significant service on our bench by sitting regularly on the Court of Appeals. And that's what he did. He had a wonderful spirit about him, both a public spirit and a warmth to his colleagues. And I'm sure they'll really miss him, even though he's been gone from the court for since 2009, succeeded by the first Hispanic justice, Sonia Sotomayor, but a great contribution to American life and the law in our country, John.
I remember being surprised when he stepped down at a relatively young age back in 2009.
I think he was only 69 at the time, John. Very young for a justice to leave the bench, yeah.
And as you said, his name will forever be associated with, I think, the enhanced, the incredibly high level of screening that now goes into presidents nominating judges. Joan Piscupic, great to see you. Thank you so much.